Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jeff Rock, and welcome to another D. Hilton Associates webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic very near and dear to my heart, the secrets they won't tell you about salary surveys. But first...
But you have two children.
Well, I have multiple children when it comes to salary surveys as well.
Okay.
First, we're going to go through a couple of administrative items. We will be recording this webinar, so if you do miss something or if you've missed a webinar in the past, please visit our website at dhilton.com. You'll find all of our previous webinars there as well. We will be sending out the slide deck once you receive the follow-up email, so you can click a link there and download the slide deck and be able to get all the information that you need there. If you have any questions through the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A section. We're going to try to get to those on the fly because I have a feeling that this webinar, we are definitely going to be bumping right up against the time. But we will try to keep it to about 45, 50 minutes to allow time at the end for a Q&A section. But we'll try to catch those on the fly. If we don't get to those, we'll circle back to you. Leave your email address. If you've registered, we'll have your email address and we'll follow up with you. So without further ado, joining us today, John Andrews. How are you, John?
Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. And joining us for the first time is Pam Santamaria. How are you, Pam?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thank you.
Pam brings an absolute wealth of knowledge, and we wanted to invite her in on this one as well. I think, over a decade of compensation experience now.
Yes.
Didn't have to put it out there, but she's bringing an absolute immense amount of data and information and knowledge behind this subject. So I think previous to here, you were managing about 20,000 employee salaries. Put those together.
Right. Yep. At Continental Airlines.
That was awesome. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to John to let him go through what we're going to be talking about today.
Thanks, Jeff. When we put the program together today, one of the things we were worried about is we're going to help you be a consumer of information, whether it's from a consultant, from a salary survey, from something on the web, or an employee that wants to stop by in your office and say they know a guy who knows a guy. Mm-hmm. So what I want everybody to kind of, in the spirit of what we're doing today, we are not talking about any specific organization, survey. We're just giving you tips to be a good consumer. So the program kind of flows like this. First, do you need to go to the market and look at surveys or salary information? The second thing is, when you look at a survey, how do you break down the methodology to make sure it's going to be a good fit for you? And then the classic that we probably get a question once or twice a week is, an employee came into my office, pulled something off for the internet. It was free. What do we do with this?
Yeah, never heard of anybody asking that at all. That's a new one, John.
I'm probably one or two times a day, probably, is what some of our HR practitioners are having to deal with out there.
Yep.
And then the mysteries of the Bureau of Labor Statistics about how that data can be used. And then we're going to finish up with some exec comp data specific issues. And the good news is, when we put this together and we were timing it to be like 7 hours, we said we got to break this into two components. So at the end of the month, March 31st, we're going to be talking specifically about market pricing techniques for staff level jobs. So we're going to talk about surveys today and talk about exec stuff, and then we will reserve some time in our next webinar for staff.
And we definitely want to preface the fact that we're not going to be speaking ill of any of the survey providers or any of these data things, but having three compensation professionals in on this, you're going to probably hear some of the frustrations we deal with on a day-to-day basis come out. So just be ready for that. Understand that we do believe in the data, but there are certain shortcomings that we want to make you aware of.
So our first topic today is it really necessary to even look for data? You have you have salary ranges, you put them together. Can't you just use that and use that every year?
Yes, and I can tell you the first answer to that is yes. Data is very, very, very important. So, first of all, let's just face it. Compensation is a very emotional and value-laden subject. So HR people are bombarded daily with requests for, like you said, John, employees coming in with so-and-so makes more, or I found this on the internet, or just any variety of pay issues.
Yeah, when an organization sets up a culture where anybody can come knock on the HR door, I'm not happy. Mm-hmm. What happens? The squeaky wheel gets
That's right.
Is it the grease?
The grease.
Oil.
Well, they get
I
something.
say oil. Yeah, they get something for sure.
The
The nail that stands out gets pounded down. Is that the
They
word?
get looked at and they get a call to D. Hilton.
And
Is
then-
what they
and-
get.
And then if you do that for one department head, then tomorrow
Right.
it's, I heard that you did this for someone else,
Right.
and it goes on and on. So the idea is that, the high performers out there commit to a process annually so they can kind of combine or get a composite look at the market, not these one-offs.
Right. And that's why we definitely recommend a consistent, looking at the
Yeah.
market every couple of years. Because we definitely want to look at the whole organization as opposed to these one-offs where you don't have the advantage of looking horizontally and vertically
Mhm.
at the jobs. So to answer that, yes, having good data, solid methodology, at one time is very beneficial.
Yeah.
It segues into the next. It helps you make informed decisions and you spend your money wisely because you don't want to be reacting to the market or to the request you're getting from employees.
Or overreacting to the market, I think is
Yes,
a
yeah.
good way to.
Well, that's
Definitely.
But you think about it, if you put a budget together, okay, we're going to buy some salary surveys. There's $99 surveys. There are $5,000 surveys. There
Mhm.
are some with 6 figures on it.
Right,
So,
right.
to be a good consumer, we need to make sure that we're looking at methodology for sure.
And there's a million different websites with different data points and different methodologies that you can't really rely on.
Mhm. And we'll touch on those a little bit further down the road as well.
Right. And you also want to use this data to pay your employees competitively. You want to have a pay philosophy that you are sticking with and that you can defend.
This idea of what's hot, what's not. I can give you an example, and we deal with this, is when the casinos came to Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, frontline employees with basic core skills to be in the retail environment all of a sudden had a different option and literally double and can triple their pay.
Yep.
So guess what was hot? If you could want to work at the casino, without looking at the market vertically and horizontally, because it impacted every department, not just this one department.
Right.
Mhm.
And last year, the poster child for this issue was mortgage folks, right?
Absolutely. Anything with mortgage on it.
People could come into
Right.
offices and shake a piece of paper that I'll look on the internet, I should be making 3 times what I am. And we're going to just help you today kind of look through and break down those issues. How do you respond to that?
Right. And you also want to use this data to create a culture of consistency because, you have a well-defined salary structure. It makes sure that you do apply pay consistently and you can defend it and you can explain it easily to your employees.
Yeah, and consistency, I believe, is just truly the key of everything that we talk about today. It's methodology, consistency. It keeps you in the bounds of one, fair pay. What is the other side of that is also the balance of what is fair and what is equitable.
Right.
And having an understanding, a good perspective to know what is fair, what is equitable, and what the market is showing as far as representation goes.
Right. Right.
And that the last one to me is the one you circle, the most important, perception.
Right.
You can spend countless hours making sure that you're competitive, but if the employee does not perceive it as fair, it might as well not be fair.
Perception is reality.
Exactly. And the way that, we do it, obviously, market pricing all your jobs, you can definitely explain to an employee that it was done consistent, fairly, and they were taken into consideration.
Yeah, the classic example there is if you work with a firm or do yourself, we're just going to benchmark.
Uh-huh.
We have 110 distinct jobs in our organization, but we're only going to market price 20.
Yeah.
You're one of the employees that is not one of the 20, and you thought your expectation was, hey, we're doing a salary survey, everybody gets a big old raise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to your boss and say, I thought it was going to be more than that.
Well, we just benchmarked you. We slid you right into there.
But we didn't actually price your job.
Yeah.
We priced this other one in accounting. Well, I'm not an accountant.
Right.
So all we're trying to do is, in the process is, what gives us more perceptual credibility in the process? Secondary sources are great as long as you can defend the why and how they can align horizontally and vertically.
Exactly.
Very important to get the full picture and the full scope. And that's one of the hardest things that especially compensation consultants that are just starting out, it's not just that number. We have to look at multiple perspectives and multiple angles. If it was just that easy, there wouldn't be this profession, to put it that way.
Exactly.
So we look at some of the facts that come along with surveys and data and things along that line. And one of the first things that usually comes to mind is government data, or like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, things along that line. And in general, that's going to be a conservative perspective on the market. It takes years for them to get that data out there. The other side of that is that it's also pretty much dominated by small companies that are reporting just basically the basics that they need to legally hit. It's not taking into consideration variable pay or incentives. So you're getting a number that is possibly years old. The data is just behind the times already. It's already going to be conservative because the market has moved. So how to actually use and leverage that data comes down to, let's look at the consistency. How do we measure it? How do we use that data piece? Because it is important data to take into consideration, but we have to know how to measure it. So you also look at custom salary surveys. And for this, we're kind of talking about, the CEO will call another CEO and say, hey, we're hiring this position. What are you guys paying? Or something along that line. You call 2 or 3 of your best friends to see generally where they're landing. Very unreliable. 2, you can be bumping up against regulatory things that, well, you shouldn't be doing that. It's a completely different perspective. So you also have a lower sample size. The N of 1 does not a market make. So if Bob across the street is making $60,000, that may be just Bob. We have to.
Well, I call that anecdotal.
Anecdotal, yeah.
Everybody's got a friend that makes so much more than them, or an associate that makes so much more than them, and then we have to put that in context.
And it's completely different as far as the perspective goes, where surveys, very validated surveys, will go through the process of saying, here are the limitations. It's this many years of experience, this many this. It's very detailed. But in a general perspective, we'll kind of get into that a little bit later too. But with those kind of things, you're getting one data point and moving on from there. So the most common now is the internet data, which is generally, you can't defend it. You don't know where the data came from. You don't know where the information came from. It could be crowdsourced. It could be just, Bob's reporting that he makes 60,000. So it's anonymous.
You joke about that, but you go back 25 and 30 years when we would work with boards, and there was a general theme that said if the data is self-reported, CEOs could put any number they want and then come back and show their boards, look, I'm underpaid. Because there wasn't that validation technique. I don't think anybody did that.
Crazy talk.
But I can't.
You'd be sure.
I can't be definitively saying no, that didn't happen. And I think the internet is just that whole scope of if it's self-reported, round up a few thousand,
And I'll have a great example of that coming up a little bit later in the presentation of some free internet data and just how valid and direct to the point it is. So also one thing we look at is like recruiter data, job boards, things along that nature. Once again, you have to kind of look at it with a questioning eye, because if you're looking for verbiage like you can earn up to, things like that, they can say, hey, we're going to pay up to $135,000, but you're starting at 40. How do you judge that? How do you determine the value based off that? 2, sometimes they don't list certain things. You're probably going to see more of this job board data coming in pretty soon, because like Colorado, you have to post the actual range for the position that you're hiring. So we're going to have to start really scraping that data and really kind of fine tuning exactly what that means. But again, you kind of look at that data with caution, but it is one of those things where somebody is waving a flag saying we are paying for this much money for this position here. The other side of it is there are tons of surveys out there. You need to make sure that you're utilizing a survey that is tied to your market. This kind of comes down to the validity versus, the valid information. If you're getting the right information for a particular job, but in a wrong market, that's wrong information. That doesn't work. Yeah. And you'll be a little bit behind. Data sources are shrinking. I kind of look at this almost like the fact of like Netflix. There was a consolidation of information of all these movies available, but slowly but surely other services have come out. So that data has gotten thinner. Those movie selections have gotten thinner. So you have to go to this one, you have to go to this one, you have to go to this one. So you're not seeing that big conglomeration of data in the past that we've seen. There's pros and cons to that as well. And the golden rule in compensation is multiple sources. I mean, the magic number is going to be 3. You want to pull in at least 3 very good validated sources that make sense for your market. Once again, one data point does not the market make. So the more data you can pull in, the more information, viable, valid information that you can pull in, then you can make a business decision on where that position lies. Again, these are very emotionally charged things when you're talking about salary and you're talking about positions. So being able to take that emotion out of that and rely on the data to see where the market pays and then take into consideration, okay, this is what the market targets. How do we want to pay?
Yeah. So I just want to circle back on number 4 real quick. The difference between contingency and retained searches. So what we're talking about here is contingency recruiters, that their fee is based on the actual starting salary of the
Oh, yes,
of the employee. So there's always been this subtle context is why would they not, like a real
Increase
estate,
that salary.
The more the house sells for, the more of a commission I'm going to get. So that's why the contingency data sometimes has that flag.
Overinflated.
Again, but if they're using third-party sources and they're using 3 sets of data and it corroborates it, it's fine. It's just a little bit of a speed bump to make sure you know the context of where they might be coming from.
Absolutely. Validate the data.
Yeah. So when we look at, if you're going to do custom work, the value of custom work, not all salary surveys will give you total comp. You said it earlier, Jeff, about total comp. How many jobs in a credit union now are variable pay for performance, where there is a stronger variable component than just a base salary, whether it's a team award or an individual award or
gain shares,
those types of things. So without that piece, sometimes you miss the mark on where you need to target. So in the past, everybody says we love Nordstrom's retail employees. We'd love to get them there. But if we're not capturing the Nordstrom data on total cash and just trying to match the base salary, you're going to miss a big chunk of why you could get that person here.
I think the exact opposite is true. You look at like a mortgage loan officer or something along that line where their salaries are $40,000, but they can earn 6 figures off that incentive. Yeah. If you're trying to make a non-incentivized version of that role, you say, oh, okay, we can pay them $40,000, and you don't take in that incentive, and
absolutely,
you're not going to land it. It's not going to happen.
And our comment on this slide here about no paper quizzes, you should go into consulting a hall of shame, I think, is when you ask an employee before you do any market pricing, you have no clue about the job. So you start with a blank sheet of paper and say, divide your day into a pie, and what percentage do you spend on this versus that? I guarantee you, if you haven't done that job, it's a very hard extrapolation to make, because, in service environment, retail environment, financial services, is there every 2 days in a row the same? Right. Absolutely not. So when we look at market prices, we, just as our methodology, you kind of think of it as a inverted triangle. So at the bottom, we look at local makes a lot more sense. So not necessarily financial institutions. So, if you have a member service rep teller where you want to look at 2 years of cash handling and 2 years of customer service,
where could I get that?
Well, don't say member, make it generic. And customer, and you're in Louisiana, who cares what a credit union in California is paying?
Absolutely.
It's going to be local things. And as you go up the chain of command, a regional look makes more sense, and then a national looks for our senior management positions make a lot more sense. So when you look at a salary survey, it might not be advantageous to use all of those data points. It can only be good for a portion of your census, not the entire census. And Pam, think about this. How many surveys out there would you actually get a hold of and say, that's going to work for 100% of the jobs?
Not many.
That silver bullet you're talking about, that holy grail?
Like, does that exist?
No. But think about
still
that.
Looking.
If you're on a time crunch and you're doing it fast and you're doing it by yourself, you're trying to find that the holy grail of compensation data. It's just not there.
Right.
And then, competitiveness, it's once we figure out that we have good data, what are you going to do with it? And then internal equity becomes such a big player in this.
Yep.
Right.
Do we going to pay all our managers the same, no matter what department they are? We're going to make distinctions there. Titles become very important. So it's not just as complex. It's more complex than saying we're going to get one survey and we're going to get one data, and then that's just going to solve all the problems. And then finally, the idea is once you get that structure, does it have to align with your pay philosophy? Because we could have 10 credit unions, same size, same branch count, same product line, and they want to attack it differently. Exactly. And that's A-okay. What works for your culture? So that, again, is just because you have data doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It's what works for your culture.
Absolutely. So, John, before we go on, we got one quick question, and this is a very, I think, a important one. I understand the accuracy limitations of the mother law research where we're asking the individuals, but from a regulatory standpoint, why is asking your buddies more problematic than commissioning a survey? And I mean, the obvious thing there is, one, the data has to be a certain amount old. You can't.
Well, it's 3 words: antitrust.
Antitrust is the big thing.
That's not 3 words.
It's close enough.
Yeah,
There's a hyphen in it. It'll combine.
Technically, yeah.
Well, what happens is, and as we get larger credit unions and we become more of substantial players, what's going to happen is it looks like collusion.
And yeah, as soon as you start fixing the price, essentially.
Hey, Jeff, what do you pay in your head of lending? Oh, no, can we? Because I got to hire a new one. Is it okay if we don't want to have the appearance of that we're doing that with our buddies. So that's it. So even if you do it, get a lot of folks, not Bob.
Mm-hmm.
It's a safe way to do that. So in the custom surveys here, it kind of transitions to the legal things. We got to make sure that we're handling DOJ and FTC guidelines. So the quick list, and we're not attorneys and we can't give you legal advice, but things that just give you kind of a good rule of thumb to make sure you're going down the right road is if you do this yourself, make sure everything's in summary form. You can't have, here's 10 credit unions, here's the 10 salaries that they're paying. If you have a match with less than 5, don't do it.
Throw it away.
And I applaud a lot of the credit union surveys out there that will say you'll have between 500 and 750 million. What does the chief lending officer pay? And they'll put an NA or asterisk because they only had 3 participants.
Right. And
all of a sudden you start to stick out.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have more, you at least strive for a 10. I just think that's for appearance, folks. When I look at a lot of SEC public company data, and they're getting really heavily pushed to, you can't just pick 4 cherry pick companies and say that's our peer group of 5. So we look at retail, financial services, you should be able to come up with more than 10. And then finally, if you have anything weighted more than 25%, so if you had 5 credit unions, but Boeing, and you're in Seattle and Boeing is 80% of the number, you're basically looking at Boeing numbers. You're not looking at, the market. So be careful with those 4 things. And I think that'll steer you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And it goes the same with data cuts for surveys as well. If you're looking at maybe the East Coast, a lot of it is weighted in New York, a lot of the data or the information, and especially the value of those because it's a completely different cost of living.
Jeff, that's March 31st.
I know, we're working on it. We're setting everybody up.
So excited.
I'm getting people excited for it.
But that's the point. We're going to talk about these correlations of, how we look at markets and look at geography. But today, Jeff?
I know, but I'm just so excited about it. I warned at the beginning that this is a subject I'm very passionate about.
It is a baby of yours, so let's expect the stories.
Yeah, there you go. So, when we look at salary surveys, this is a classic. We love ERI. They do great data. We use it on behalf of a lot of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
This is a classic letter you get. Dear valued HR practitioner, we're starting our surveys. Hey, fill it out by April 2nd. Guess what you get about April 1st?
We have extended.
We're having such great participation that we don't want anybody to be left out. So we're going to go give you 10 more days. And then April 12th, you get, dear valued HR customer.
Guess what? There's more.
One more time. So I'm not making light of the situation because we've been doing surveys for 30 plus years, and it's, it takes a lot of work to do these right.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of effort. And even if you're going to get data back, sometimes people will fill out 1 or 2, skip a few.
And you don't want any of those NAs showing up on your survey.
And there's a lot of NAs. So if you're going to participate in a survey, all we ask is not a D. Hilton survey, but anything, just, take it seriously, invest the time, because the time you invest, it makes it a stronger product.
Better data.
Better data, better results. And then so this is a list we've been working on for a number of years. So when you get a survey and it says 2021 credit union compensated data, and you're excited and you go to page 54 because you start with tellers, hard stop, go back to methodology and make sure you're checking the boxes of the context of how valuable this is going to be for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first thing I look for, was it an internal survey or did they outsource the actual process? When I was 19, I did a gig job for Acme Brick Company.
So literally dirt was being created when you were 19.
19 bricks, molding bricks. So it was a brand awareness study. So they paid me $75 an hour to ask people in the greater Dallas metro area, DFW, when you think of bricks, what type of bricks do you think of? So I paid three fraternity brothers $10 an hour to call, because you called people back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did this study. I had no clue what a brick was. I didn't know if this was a good answer or a bad answer, but that became a brand awareness study. So what happens is when you look at a survey and it was outsourced to whether a consultant or to a university professor, make sure you're comfortable with that relationship, because we could have folks that have never done survey research before filling out numbers for you.
Yep.
And the analogy I like to use is my difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant when we do market pricing is, okay, if you want a bookkeeper, they add up 10 numbers and they get the right number. An accountant will add up the exact same 10 numbers and get the exact same result and say, this is not the right number, because of their history saying, usually that's a 5-digit number, not a 4-digit number. Why is this one so much bigger? So the quality goes in of, if we're entrusting a third party to do this, make sure they understand the credit union industry, they understand the jobs is very important. And if you're not comfortable, or you see 3 surveys and 3 different companies doing it 3 different years, we lose some thought knowledge goes out the window every time we start over.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a good chance when you look at a 21 survey, the data was collected in 19 or 20.
Right.
So we always have to age data in some form or fashion, but make sure that you're understanding how old it might be. Okay. Well, it's a 2020 study, and let's say we're doing right. It's a 2020 study. It's only a year old. How bad can that be?
Nothing. No changes.
Did anything happen last year?
No, nothing significant.
No. I'm on record
or
saying
unprecedented.
Yeah, I am going to go ahead and skip the next unprecedented event.
Yeah.
You guys just let me know how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not joking, guys. I would rather use a 2019 data than 2020 data for a lot of jobs, because there's just so many anomalies in that data. So the next thing is, some surveys won't tell you how many people participated. So how many
Red flag.
Well, just in the last hour, we've talked about, is it 5? Is it 20? What's your comfort level? Or they won't tell you who participated, the names. So, it's just frustrating if you're going to go to your boss with confidence that this is your recommendation and you don't have that crumb of information to share. And a big one that we see is, this might be the 25th consecutive survey done, but it's really, they start over every year. So there's no cumulative information sometimes. And there was a survey, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, where I went through the methodology and they said the survey participation was about 80 participants out of 160 potential. 50%, I'll take that, not bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, however, 41% of this year's survey participants were different than last year's survey participants.
So it's a whole new data set.
Yes, exactly.
So in that case, the consumer of this research should say, did the market move because the market moved, or did the market move because it was a convenient sample? And in this case, when you're in the 40s, there's a concern.
Yeah.
And I got an example to show you a study where that it doesn't make sense. And then finally, job matching titles.
Oh.
It is an art, not a science.
No.
And so just because a credit union survey or a bank survey or a general industry survey says teller,
Mm-hmm.
you got to have some type of definition in there that says, what does your teller do versus my teller?
There is no one-to-one, it seems.
Yes.
Like Pam, the concept of universal teller coming out with a lot of clients, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
What do they want a universal teller to do?
Sell and, everything else. So it's very
They're one step
hard
from the CEO.
Yeah.
Well,
you have to really get down to the duties to match these in the market.
so if your perception is our teller is just kind of a cash transaction type of person, and then referring people to other departments, as opposed to the universal, which is saying one-stop shopping, I can take that loan app, that job's worth more valuable.
Absolutely.
Right.
And, and you look at a job description.
And a variable component and it's going to be all different.
Yeah. So these first 5 just say, not saying any survey's bad, but we want to go through methodology to look at how they're attacking those issues. A lot of frustration in our industry is you'll get base salary information, but you won't get total cash. And then, and when we look at it that way, some people might give you a total cash and they give you a base, but there's no differentiation between the two numbers, and that's just survey error filling out error.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but there's no way to go back and check that. And then in credit union land, a lot of our work has always been done by asset bands. So, if you're 700 million, and you're looking for a match. Sometimes a survey will say 500 to a billion, some will say 700 to 900 million, and that's where, trying to get apples to apples can be a challenge, because there's no way to slice it. You're given what you're given. You can't slice it. Would be more convenient for you. The idea that everybody swears and pledges that data's confidential, but sometimes it can slip out, not just simply because you're the only billion-dollar credit union in this state, and if they put the chart together, you start to stick out.
Yeah.
Right.
You can put the pieces together.
And we haven't done ourselves a favor on some of the surveys that we report. We report some average data. I'll show you a sample in just a second. But when you do that, our detractors, that people that might want to tax our industry because they think our comp is excessive, we're giving them fodder for, totally wrong, but they're giving fodder for that discussion. And then finally, if you do something in-house and you do it with your buddies, there's a good chance that you might be violating antitrust.
Sherman, yep.
So it is 2 words, not 3 words.
See, I told you, it was either a hyphen or it was together, so we're good to go.
Okay. So this is in D. Hilton's Hall of Shame. This has nothing to do with cues. This has nothing to do with the author. This is a correct reporting of information in a study from 2013. The American Bankers Association actually got a hold of this, and they played it up in their press release. It says, wow, it must be nice to be a credit union CEO. Look how much more money they make than bank presidents. Little footnote, we're not talking anything about all the equity bank CEOs might be earning or have earned.
Is that stocks or something along that line?
Something along that line. It doesn't talk about perks. It doesn't talk about a variable pay. So the only reason I wanted to bring this up in our presentation today is look at the first thing. The average CEO of a credit union makes more than $250,000 this year. That is a correct number, not disputing that number. But if you're a billion-dollar credit union, does this data help you? No. Does this data help you if you're a $50 million credit? The average is just something that we can't work with. But look at the last sentence there. The number is actually down from 260,000 from its 2012 survey. So correct information, properly reported, but the context of that statement says credit union CEOs took a haircut. In 12 and 13, there wasn't any catastrophic.
Catastrophic?
One more time.
That was a catastrophic pronunciation of catastrophic.
I am absolutely not even going to try that one again. It wasn't a bad year.
No more dollar words for John.
Yeah, no, that was a tough one. But you see where I'm going with it. Mm-hmm. So that was it a convenient sample? Was it who participated in the survey? And you know what's happening now is, that long tenured CEO is finally retiring. They're replacing that CEO with somebody closer to midpoint. That's not a market movement.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a specific issue. And then I'm not going to go through this whole list, but it just breaks down every asset band and says, good things and bad things. And again, a volunteer can get this and read this and then bring this to the board meeting and say, it's time to look at CEO merit increase and say, well, the market went down by 10 grand. Do we need to do anything this year?
Because it looks like viable quality information that's being delivered from a trusted source.
Now, let's make it real for 2020. There's going to be tons of stuff of unemployment, industries having a trouble. Last year, the credit union industry didn't do so bad.
Yeah.
Right.
There, the deposit growth, the revenue was fine, the delinquencies in check. We don't know how long it's going to stay, but you get a study like this, it gives somebody that doesn't want to be competitive great ammunition to say we don't have to do anything. Yep. And I can tell you, if you don't do anything for your executives because of 2020, you're at risk.
Absolutely.
Bottom line, the market kept moving.
And I mean, we even talked about that. The supply and demand of executives is, if you're not on top of the market, yeah, you're at very much risk.
So this next slide these are things we want you to ask us if we were to do work for you. When did you collect the data? If it was aged, how old is it? And what do we have to do with it? How many participants? If it's $1 billion question, $1 billion client, ask the question, how many folks would you might have in it? Are you going to name who's in your study? Are you going to look at variable pay? And this is a classic. It's kind of my pet peeve is a lot of surveys will produce actual variable pay paid. That is an absolute correct question to ask. But to me, the more important question is, what was the target incentive?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if a CEO has a particularly poor year, and a board was willing to pay a 30% incentive plan, but they only earn 5%. A lot of surveys report the 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come back and say you're way overpaying your CEO because look, they only made 5%.
5%.
Right.
But conversely, if your CEO didn't have such a hot year and was paid 5%, but you were willing to pay 30, I'm going to give you credit. You were willing to pay 30 if pay performance metrics were hit.
Right.
That's your potential of total cash compensation.
So I think that's one thing that a lot of data in the credit industry gets unreported because of actual versus target. So when you look at a survey, make sure you kind of, how are you going to deal with it? Because it's correct data. It's right data. There's no question. But how are you going to deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, kind of spend a lot of time on that. Was it outsourced, data collection outsourced, or was it validated inside? So averages, real quick, just a quick math lesson. If you do averages and you look at 5, let's just call it CEO salaries, and it was $1.65 divided by 5, the average is 330. Okay, so we go to the board and say, hey, we need to be looking at 330 as a target. But if you use percentiles, we add up the same numbers and we say the 50th percentile is 250,000. That's probably a more meaningful number to base your plans off of.
Yeah, you have much more consistency there and an outlier that's dragging it up one way direction.
And
with the medians.
What's wrong with this example?
A lot of things.
Wow. Are you a
John made
consultant?
this.
Or what?
I know, it's like,
But it's only
which
5,
thing? Which
but
thing?
It's a small sample size. It's
Yeah, it's 5. Yeah. But if this was 50 numbers or 500, I just didn't trust my math past 5. Now, serious subject. 990s are prevalent. They're getting more popular as we go through. More and more credit unions, as they move to state charters, field of membership changes are using this. Again, with the proper context, great data, but you've got to be concerned about this. So look at this. Every tax exempt person organization needs to fill out a 990. It's at least 2 years old, and it's hardly error free. There is no consequence for filling out a 990 wrong.
Right.
They said that the quote in that box there, 98.64% chance no one will ever check from the IRS will check your 990. I think the consequence is you would lose your status as a not-for-profit for, whether it was a religious organization or a pet adoption agency, those types of things. But there's over 1.6 million, organizations and credit unions are falling into this. They have less than 1,000 people to take care of this. So the chance you're going to get investigated is not high. There's no consequence you feel it wrong. My brother's a CFO of a public company. If he signs his name to the incorrect financials, he goes to big boy jail.
Mm-hmm.
If he was a CFO of a credit union and fills out a 990 and puts a number in the wrong category, he just says, I'll get him next time. So again, be careful with 990s for some of those reasons. And literally, you have to fill it out 5 months after your fiscal closing. So not annual closing, so fiscal. And then if you don't have your act together, because small organization, you're an organization of 10 people, this is a burden.
Mm-hmm.
So you can fill out 1-page form and get a 6-month extension. And then the IRS has got to take a few months to get it together. So that's how we come up with 2 years. Now, what's a challenge is in the credit union, now this is credit union specific. Look, if we right now, I think this is up to date from last month, 5,244 credit unions, 3,213 are federal. So if you are basing your entire, exec comp program on 990s, you've taken more than half of the market out,
Mm-hmm.
right? Going back to, is 40% enough sample size? Well, I would be a little concerned because, if you wanted to do a regional cut of data, if you wanted to do your state, if you wanted to slice it and dice it, we're just giving you fewer and fewer people to look at.
Right.
Now look at credit unions over 500 million. It's still 45% of those organizations are federal. So you're taking 45% of the potential out of there. So as a recruiter, I rarely get a request of we only want state chartered credit union experience. It's
Right.
That's who we're competing against. Now at the $1 billion club, look, it goes down to 43%. So there is a trend, from a strategic point of view, that some credit unions would like the state chartered field of membership designation so you can operate in that manner. But again, that's leaving a lot of credit unions out of the mix. And it only takes 1 or 2, for somebody to poach.
Mm-hmm.
your executives. So that's a concern. So do not leave this webinar thinking 990s are bad, but make sure you're using the proper context of how you're using
them
the
to
how
build
to
your
use-
complete pay line.
Exactly. How to use the data.
Yeah.
That's it. All data is important. Just make sure you're using it well.
There you go. So when we look at questions we want to ask is, again, reinforcing this is, are you going to get the participants? When was the effective use of the data? What's the relevance to your job? And Pam, think of the jobs we're doing now, like in the risk area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some are adding IT security. Some are
Right.
not adding IT security. Some things, the audit is tucked under there. Sometimes there's some admin part of this job. And so, and unless you can get about a 70% match, stay away from it because it's not reflective.
Exactly.
But you know how I said earlier about, the old classic consulting thing was to give you a blank sheet of paper and you do your pie chart? Well, it's a hot job, so if you're spending 70% on pure risk and 30% on admin, you shouldn't dilute the risk
Right.
number 30%,
Mhm.
use 70%, because actually you've just taken yourself out of being competitive. It's a premium.
Yep.
And somehow we thought there should be some perfect correlation between 70% equals X and 30% equals Y, and that's the actual lasered in number for you, when really it's not.
And,
No.
and this is the other thing of why it's so important to have those multiple data sources, because you can blend the data together. You have somebody that's capable and competent enough to know how those pieces all fit together to make sure you're not actually punishing an individual for doing more work, essentially.
Right.
So, who completed the survey is good. Did the president fill out his own? Did the HR fill it out? Did a volunteer? And I can tell you, it's just as much challenge for volunteers filling out data than CEOs, because just they don't have access to all of the things in terms of benefit offerings and retirement plans sometimes. And then if you do participate, how will they protect your confidentiality? And then one that is beautiful that some of the larger firms do is they give you a chance to confirm what you put down.
Right.
It's just not a one-way gathering of data. Say, okay, here's what you said. Are you going to sign off on this?
And mistakes happen, so it's good.
Big time. And then the math. Are you going to be using averages, percentiles? How are we going to look at the market? So our next topic was to look at BLS, and a lot of it's so tantalizing to use it because it's robust. There's a lot of information, but we talked about it's very conservative. So I did this at the beginning of the month. I said, I want to know about loan officers. Tell me BLS what you got. It's free, and they did this incredible study. And I could get 2019 data. So
Again,
if
did
I
anything happen?
absolutely have to know what happened 2 years ago. So now I have to age this, and I have to figure out what happened in 2020. I have to look at each market and say, was there a supply and demand issue? Is this, how much does mortgage take into versus retail? So here, they give me great stats on, I could match a job. The idea that the job outlook for the last 10 years, you see, is moving as fast as the average. So it's moving. There's going to be 3% more folks doing this job in 10 years.
Again, what happened last year?
Yeah, I don't know.
To change any
I don't
of
know.
this.
These numbers are perfectly legitimate for everything that's happening right now.
And then the beauty of this report kept going on. Okay, let me look by metro area. And then, wow, there's 14,900 of these folks doing it in the LA statistical metro area. And there's only 5,920 doing this in Minneapolis. I don't know if that helps me. Okay, well, I'm in Minneapolis, so I'll use that number. I think that works. But then I get hourly mean wage, and I don't get the total comp
Right. I was
picture.
gonna say, where's the total comp?
This is a loan
Yeah.
officer.
Mhm.
And as a big part, as kind of we discussed before, if you're trying to create a non-salaried version of this role, 40,000 is fine, 50,000 is fine. They have a huge portion dealing with that incentive.
And then sometimes we do need to laser in on talent, on specific employers. We talk about casinos moving in the area; they will move a market. Buc-ee's, well, you told me how many people are participating today, but not the whole country has had the pleasure of going to a Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's is a convenience store, gas truck stop.
Shopping mecca.
Yeah. If you need 147 gas pumps, Buc-ee's is your place to go.
And a mother-in-law present for Christmas.
Oh,
something
that's
for the
a
kids.
baby gift.
It's basically a Cracker Barrel, a truck stop,
We love Buc-ee's, and everybody should have one.
And a car
But look,
wash.
this is what they put on every front door of their chain. We're paying $15 to $17 for cashiers. So you could go do literally, 5 and 6 and 10 surveys and survey all your credit union components. But if you have a Buc-ee's 10 miles away from a branch, you better put them in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to validate this? I guess I could go apply at Buc-ee's.
Right.
But this is what we're going to see more of,
Mm-hmm.
I think, because of short supply is put this in the mix. Well, they're not a credit union. Cash handling,
Customer service.
managers,
Exactly.
management trainee, all of that matches.
I mean, and we just talked about
Skills.
that the teller position as it's evolving into the universal teller is becoming more. The skill set is increasing, and here you have a cashier, food service, just a very basic transactional individual, $15 to $17 an hour.
And Pam,
Skills transfer for sure. So
it's not about the money, right? For you, it's about vacation.
Yep.
Right there.
3 weeks.
Three
And it
weeks.
rolls
Yeah,
over, and you can cash it out.
exactly.
I mean,
Pam's never going to let 3
They
weeks.
they really put a lot of information on that.
Yeah, but look, are those the hot buttons for a 17 to 24-year-old? They
Absolutely.
nailed it. They nailed
absolutely.
it. So when we look at free data, I want to quickly talk about this today. This is the kind of scenario we talked about. The employee comes into your office and says, "Hey, look what I found!" Right?
Yeah, and increasingly we're going to see more and more of that because more data is being. I mean, this generation is okay with having conversations about what they earn, and a lot of times they'll go right to the internet and say, "Am I earning enough?" So you obviously have pros and cons, and we use all of this data. So, like I said, we speak about the frustrations on some of this, but keep in mind that the data is valid as long as you're able to make sure how you're using the data. So with free data, of course, one of the biggest positives is it's free. You can actually go online, you can find this data, but the problem is how do you validate it? How do you verify it? How do you make sure that that is actually getting you the number? I always joke that it's, the reliability and the validity of things. If you have a scale that's giving you the wrong number every time, but it's giving it to you consistently, you know how to manage that number. You know how to then say, okay, if I put a 5-pound thing on there, it's saying 4 pounds, I know I have to age this or change it by 1 pound. So if you can find the way to use that data, it's very important. And increasingly, we're going to see more with crowdsourced information because we're going to get this data scraping that's going on, especially as more.
That's where all of the kind of those big box, large consulting comp firms are going to crowdsource.
And I mean, it makes sense.
Cheaper for them. They don't have to do surveys anymore. There's the thought of strength in numbers, but it still has those self-reporting challenges.
Absolutely. We have to know how to use that data, how to actually get that number into a viable place. And there are certain things that we got to plan for, like with the crowdsourcing. Generally, executives aren't going to take the time to fill that out. So you're not going to have good executive data. And minimum wage individuals, they're not going to fill it out either. They just kind of go. So it kind of caters towards the middle. Traditional surveys you're aware of. You know those. They're validated, but you do have the shortcomings of the data takes a long time to get into your hands. So you have to make sure, okay, let's follow the trend. How far behind is this? How much do we have to plan for? Let's look at other sources so we can pull that together. And then, of course, compensation databases. So those are going to be the most up-to-date. You're able to put in information, aggregate the data, and then get a response. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money to back on that. So we're going to focus on the free data that we're seeing because that's going to be the most common thing that you're going to fight against as an HR professional. So you'll have an individual come to you and say, look, I went on Glassdoor and I looked up and in this case, I used one because it's really popular right now, mortgage underwriters. Everybody's feeling the pain in mortgage. They went to Glassdoor and said, okay, I'm a mortgage underwriter. What should I be paying? So right from the get-go, we're seeing multiple different perspectives of things that we have to take into consideration. Up in the upper right, it says very high confidence. We see that it has over 12,000 salaries in this. It was updated not too long ago. I actually pulled this information last week.
But hey, Jeff.
Sure.
I pulled Glassdoor too.
But hold on. So consumer underwriter, did you notice the average base pay was exactly the same as the last one? The average base pay for a mortgage underwriter 57,152. Consumer underwriter.
Wait, Pam pulled.
I did it too.
Pam,
I was
you
going to
did?
say, I did it too.
What'd you get, Pam?
I was just curious to see. And funny enough,
You got the same number.
Underwriter salary. So an underwriter takes into consideration insurance underwriting, all these other positions, exactly the same average base pay. So literally, we went through 3 different positions that are paid 3 different ways in the market. And with this very high confidence data of 12,000 data points, we got the exact same number. And you can look that the updated was on different days too. So these are the kind of situations that you're going to get if you didn't do the research, if you didn't have somebody back in that data and somebody came into your office and said, look, I've got this source. Here's what I should make. Would you have known that there's 3 data points out there that are exactly the same?
And if you're lucky enough to be a head of HR where you do have a compensation specialist on your staff, it goes back to the accountant versus bookkeeper analogy. You can be a comp analysis and go pull these 3 pages, or you can be a comp analysis and say, wait, the job was mortgage. Why is it the same? And maybe I need to find a different source to corroborate it. It could be 57,000. We're not saying it couldn't be.
right.
But we don't know.
But we would like another layer of investigation before we're, going to base our whole recommendation on that.
Exactly. And again, it comes down to multiple data points, but you can also see that sometimes pulling multiple data points, you got to be able to know and trust the source that you're coming to. And that takes a lot of validation. It takes a lot of conversation. And to John's point, having a compensation strategist to be able to say, this makes sense. I've added these numbers up the same as the accountant did, but here's why it's different, or here's what we need to be looking at. So you have these things where they're missing the context. You don't have the size, the geographic scope. And even, and by the way, you saw those little drop downs on that Glassdoor. I changed those. It came up to be exactly the same again. So even if I changed industries, even if I changed years of experience, they all came out to be exactly the same. You have to be concerned about stale data. Who's pruning that data source? You may have 12,000 data points on there, but how many of those came from 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago?
Well, when you do a Google search, you can find 2002 salary surveys.
Absolutely.
I would totally recommend those.
And they're robust and they're phenomenal. They've got a lot of data, but it serves almost no purpose.
There's no difference between now and aging something.
Yeah,
as we'll see.
that's the challenge here.
Yeah, and in self-reported, you don't know if a person fully understands their position at times because the titles are different. We talked about the titles before. I'm a mortgage underwriter. What's that mean for a different company? The years of experience are different. The location is different. The market pressures are different. So you just have to look at the data from a very curious eye to make sure that, well, 1, the data source is viable, 2, the information that's coming in, and 3, make sure that you have somebody that's there that's able to see those common threads and those lines of the strategy of the whole perspective.
Okay, in our last area that we're going to talk about, we're going to pivot to specifically about execs. And a study that I'm very proud of that we've done since 1999 is looking at factors that correlate with compensation, because the number one thing you ask is who are we going to compare against, whether you're going to use a salary survey, do it yourself or whatever. And asset size is by far the one that most people use. It correlates the best, but it's only at 0.50. The perfect correlation is 1.0. So like if you're, when we're doing pharmaceuticals or the COVID vaccine, we want 0.9999 something.
Right.
And so it just says there's a lot of factors that go into why we pay what we pay people. But look at COL stands for cost of living. Very weak. So one of the intuitive things a volunteer might say is, well, we're in Tennessee in the mountains. It's rural. We're not New York City. But when we look at the credit union industry, it doesn't correlate as that's a significantly lower paid CEO than somebody that was in New York City. We're basically the same scope job.
And you sometimes will have to actually pay more to get the qualified talent to go to those areas too.
Jeff, take it one step further and say probably some of the highest paid CEOs, regardless of size, are turnaround experts. If they're going in there to fix a shop, going to have to make unpopular decisions,
better pay me to do that.
There's a correlation there. Yeah. So some people think that the high performers are the ones that move the market, and sometimes it's depending on your asset band, troubled credit unions.
How do you fix this?
Move the market. And so this looks at just billion-dollar credit unions. If you look on the left there, even though there's 360, they're not perfectly distributed between the billions. They are clustered between 1 and 2 billion. Half of our credit unions out there today, 1 out of 2, 51% are between 1 and 2 billion. So if you were a $3 billion credit union, you would get a different result if you used 1 to 5 or 2 to 5.
Right.
It just depends what you're comfortable using. So the idea is that if you only can use data cuts and not have the ability to customize, you might get a wrong, a result that might not be as competitive as you want it to be. Okay.
Right.
So the other point I wanted to make today is the $1 billion mark is not magical, nor is the 500 million, nor is the $100 million. So if you're 999 million in assets on Friday and on Monday you're 1.02, doesn't mean everybody should get a 20% raise.
What changed internally?
Yeah. So in this example, these are the dots are actual CEO salaries in this example. And we looked at $1 million and we looked at, look at the bottom left quadrant. Kind of what you would think, lower than $1 billion, the lower paid. But then you go above $1 billion, guess what? There's people below that line call it 500,000. It's a little bit lower than that. Then look at top left quadrant. Those are people smaller than $1 billion that are making more than the bottom right quadrant.
Right.
So it goes to say that pay philosophy really drives this decision, as opposed to just because we're bigger, we should get paid more.
Yep. And again, we're bringing back that data point of that's base.
Yeah.
Where are we talking about incentives, variable pays? It doesn't take in the full picture.
And I think you've gotten to the point today where we advocate percentiles. So
yes, please.
A lot of pay
Absolutely.
philosophies are based on pay the market. Market defined as the 50th percentile. Well, the 50th percentile means half pay more, half pay less. So if you're a board and you've got a high performing CEO, you got a high performing credit union, are you okay with just the 50th percentile? Because that means half of your peer / competitors might be able to offer a competitive package that could beat yours.
Right.
So we're not advocating pay more to pay more. We're saying how much risk do you want to take off the table?
That's what you pay for.
And that's a personal decision for every board out there.
Yep.
And it's okay to say you want it lower, but you're going to say, I'm willing to take more of a risk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So be careful with those averages. We've talked about that a few times. And here's this concept of aging. Kind of want to end on today. So if you had data from 2016, just hypothetically, and you aged it a certain percentage every year, you'd get to 303. Now, if you verified, and this is usually 990, where this if you start and then age, well, 2016, this is a legitimate example here that from one of our clients. It was the former CEO that his last year on the job was 2016. 2017 was a first-time CEO, and sometimes the prejudice there are, well, they shouldn't make as much as the former CEO. Okay, I can buy that argument. They don't need the 50th percentile because they haven't proven themselves yet. Okay, that's a little tougher because if you want them, your CEO, they should be pretty competent to do the job. And then in 2018, after the person had been there a year, they go, well, she is really high performing. We need to get back on the market train. And they had to do a pretty significant adjustment. And then in 2019, because they had fixed it in 18, they took care of it in 19, and then they did 2 normal increases. The numbers are off by almost 12%. So
just a little bit.
Well, the reason I do this, hypothetically, when you just take a number from the past and age it by a certain cost of living or inflation factor, you could be off. And because, Craig, we have so few data points to actually work with, that's what we need to be careful about. And that's what we want to do for our clients, is make sure they, feel confident about how we do that.
Yep.
So with that said, we don't necessarily want to make this into a sales presentation, but the types of things that we do based on this information is we help develop reasonableness statements, whether it's for the media, that, hey, we looked at your 990. Why did you pay your CEO millions of dollars last year? Well, because that was retirement payout. We do design long and short-term plans. We look at doing total comp studies, and we do this for staff as well as execs. We also work with exec comp committees to develop work plans for them for the year, make sure that they feel good about how they're supporting the organization. And then we obviously do SERPs, retirement and retention design. So with that said, hope today again, I want to stress, we're not picking on anybody, but we're saying when we have data, there's limitations. And the more informed you are of how to look at methodologies and how to look at data, the better you can do for your organization.
I mean, it comes down to how you're leveraging that data. I remember an old buddy of mine back quite a few years ago used the analogy of if you're not using big data, you should be using big data. And if you are using big data, you should probably be using a consultant to understand that big data. Because, I mean, we can torture the statistics and get them to tell you anything. So if you don't have somebody or some process, some consistent methodology that's telling you how to use that data, you might be missing the boat and you're going to miss out on a good opportunity. So we are right up against time. If you have any questions, go ahead and get them in right now. But otherwise, if it doesn't look like we've got any questions that we haven't addressed already, so we're looking pretty good. Again, we have recorded this webinar, so it will be posted on our website in about 3 to 5 days. You'll receive a follow-up email with information about the survey, or it will have a survey in there. Let us know how we're doing, what you're doing, and what you would like to see. This topic actually came from one of the surveys. There was a couple individuals that did want to hear some information about salary surveys, so here it is. We have delivered for you. You'll also receive a link in there for the slide deck, so just click that link and you'll be able to download the slide deck. But then, John, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time as always. And Pam, thanks so much for joining us this time.
Pam.
Was it as bad as you think?
It was not bad. I'll be back.
All right.
Oh wait, did we ask her back?
Well, you know, we gotta wait.
Well,
We gotta wait and see what the surveys say.
I don't have to believe
We'll
me.
talk to your agent.
Yeah,
See what her demands are.
we'll
for next
do
time.
lunch. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Stay healthy. We'll talk with you again next time.
Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.